Before all of this began, I would have said my family was like any other, imperfect, but close-knit and full of love. Our days revolved around shared dinners, catching up on each other's lives and making plans for the future. As a father, I took pride in the way my children seemed to carry the values we had instilled in them. I had no inkling then of the storm brewing just below the surface, ready to shatter the foundation of our home. Looking back, there were perhaps subtle clues, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but in retrospect felt like warnings I failed to heed. Joanne, my eldest, had always been a headstrong and independent soul. Her confidence often veiled the vulnerability she struggled to express. I was so focused on maintaining what I thought was harmony in our family that I didn't see how deeply she was hurting until it was too late. It was her attitude that immediately alerted me something was off. Our daughter Joanne came home in distress, leaning on both Linda and me for solace. She had betrayed her husband, Jack, and now sought my help to convince him to forgive her and give their marriage another chance. Joanne argued that almost all men, about 90%, had been unfaithful at some point. So, Jack was probably no exception. After all, he was charismatic, attractive, and always had women around him vying for his attention. Have you ever actually seen him do anything that would suggest he's been unfaithful? I inquired. He's charming, and women are drawn to him, but that doesn't mean he's cheated. Why in the world did you make such a choice? I asked, perplexed. It wasn't planned, Joanne confessed, her voice trembling. We were at that party, and Jack had to leave early because of a work issue. I had a bit too much to drink, and when he said he wouldn't return, he told me to get a ride home with one of my friends. Eric Turner gave me a ride. She paused, wiping her tears. He kept telling me how much he admired me. Then he kissed me. And when we got to my house, things escalated. It felt good, so I didn't stop him. I guess I was pretty drunk. I didn't know Jack was already home. The next thing I knew, Jack burst open the car door and saw me, half-dressed, sitting on Eric's lap while he... Joanne choked on her words, unable to continue. Joanne, if you think I'm going to take your side or intervene, you're wrong, I said coldly. Your mother and I raised you better than this. We've been married for 30 years, and if she ever did something like that, I'd throw her out. It would hurt me deeply, but I'd have to do it to maintain my self-respect. Come on, Daddy, Joanne cried. You've never been tempted in all these years? Sure, I've been tempted a few times, but there has to be trust and respect. Do you honestly think your mother has ever betrayed me? The room fell into complete silence. I hadn't paid attention to Linda while I was scolding Joanne, but the silence in the room made me look at her. She was sitting there, pale, her gaze fixed on the floor. I could tell she couldn't meet my eyes, so I stood up, walked out to the kitchen, and tried to clear my head. Joanne was still crying when she came to grab her coat to leave, and I couldn't hold back my anger anymore. I asked Joanne if she knew her mother had been unfaithful to me. Her silence and refusal to look at me told me everything. It was clear she probably already knew. I muttered to myself about how this situation seemed to run in the family. I told Joanne to leave, bitterly reflecting on how I could relate to how Jack must feel. I hoped he'd do the right thing and cut her loose for good. When I went back into the living room, Linda was finally looking at me. She apologized, asking if I could ever forgive her. Her voice was full of regret, but I wasn't sure I could believe it. I told her I knew what had happened and that it seemed Joanne was already aware of it. The thought that Joanne had probably looked at me with pity every time she came over hit me hard. At this point, everything was out in the open, and I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. I told Linda we had to figure out what came next. Linda, her voice trembling, asked if we could go back to how things had been. She said she still loved me, but I couldn't accept that. There were too many people who knew now. Her, Joanne, probably Jack, and anyone he'd bragged to. It was all too much. I couldn't continue pretending that things were normal. She tried to defend herself, saying she'd never denied me anything. She'd given me love, support, and had taken care of everything in our home. But I couldn't ignore the deeper issues, the trust, the commitment, the loyalty. I realized I had been giving those things to her, but she hadn't done the same. I told her I couldn't stay. It was clear I'd need to leave. I also told her to get a lawyer, that I'd be fair, but I couldn't promise civility forever, especially given how angry I felt. I went upstairs and packed a suitcase, trying to do it quickly. Traveling often had made me efficient at packing. When I came back down, Linda was still sitting where I left her, waiting for me to say something else. She asked if I wanted to know how it all happened, but I didn't. I didn't want to hear the details. I knew she'd been willing. She didn't drink, so there were no excuses there. I told her I'd have my lawyer contact her and that she needed to tell him who she'd hired. I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed. I'd been happy with Linda for so long. but I couldn't see that ever happening again. I told her to make sure Jason heard it from her, not from Joanne. He was going to be hit hard when he found out both his mother and his sister had betrayed him. Without waiting for her to say anything else, I left the house. Later, I sat alone in a motel room, reflecting on the life I'd lived so far. It had been easy in many ways. My parents were upper middle class, which had given me access to a good education. People always said I was too serious, but they knew where they stood with me. I wasn't perfect, but I believed in sticking to rules. Marriage, for me, was a serious commitment. I took those vows seriously, and I expected the same from Linda. I couldn't understand why she thought she didn't have to. Linda was a teacher, for God's sake. She spent her days teaching kids to follow rules. If they didn't, they faced consequences. Yet she didn't seem to apply the same standards to herself. The guy she had an affair with must have been something, but I didn't want to know the details. The thought that he could have been better in any way, physically, emotionally, or otherwise, was too painful to consider. I always put Linda first, and I couldn't imagine anyone doing more for her than I had. But now, sitting in that motel room, I realized I didn't feel the same about her. The love was still there, but it wasn't the same. It left a hole in my heart, one I hoped would heal over time. The kids, Jason and Joanne, would probably pressure me to stay with their mother, but maybe not Joanne. She already knew what Linda had done. She might even think her mother was better off without me. I didn't know what the future held, but I decided I would wait, let things unfold, and then make my choice. The next Monday morning, I called my lawyer, Alex, and told him I wanted a divorce. He was both a lawyer and a friend to both Linda and me, so he wanted to know everything. I didn't have any proof of the affair, but he warned me that if Linda hired a lawyer, they would likely fight the divorce. I told him it wouldn't matter. There was no way Linda could win me back, no matter how hard she tried. I promised I'd be fair in the settlement, but I couldn't continue living a lie. That was the most important thing for him to focus on, the paperwork and making the process as smooth as possible. My secretary fielded several calls in the afternoon. Alex, Jason, Joanne, and Linda all tried to reach me. I had instructed her to tell them to call my motel that evening if they wished to speak with me. However, when I arrived at the motel, Jason, Joanne, and Linda were already waiting for me. Jason cautiously asked if they could speak with me in private, adding that Linda hoped I could eventually move past her betrayal. I agreed to the discussion, but made it clear that her hopes were unlikely to be realized. We went upstairs to my room on the second floor. I turned to Joanne and inquired about her situation with Jack. She admitted she had begged him to let her return, and though he agreed, he confined her to the guest room while he decided whether to take her back. She also confessed he refused to sleep with her, her voice thick with emotion and tears threatening to spill. I offered her little comfort, suggesting that if her remorse was genuine and she pleaded earnestly, perhaps Jack might forgive her. Linda seemed encouraged by my words to Joanne, but I quickly extinguished that hope. I told her Jack might be able to forgive such a mistake, but I was not built that way. Her pleas for a resolution where I returned home, even if she stayed in the guest room, were met with uncertainty. When I pressed her about her affair, she avoided providing a name, claiming it was irrelevant because I didn't know the man. She revealed they had met 27 years ago at a teachers' convention, though she evaded my pointed questions about how many times she had been with him. The realization struck me. There was a teachers' convention every year, and Linda had attended them all. When I confronted her with the possibility that she had been unfaithful annually for 27 years, she reluctantly admitted to missing only 2 conventions during that time. She expressed shame, acknowledging that the full extent of her actions only became clear to her when exposed. Linda attempted to justify her behavior, pointing out that the physical connection we shared after her trips often resulted in deeply intimate moments, even claiming that both Jason and Joanne were conceived during those post-convention reunions. My mind twisted painfully at the thought that her passion for me could have been fueled by memories of her lover from just days prior. Although she insisted the children were biologically mine, I couldn't suppress my doubts. Turning to Jason, I told him I hoped he was truly my son, as I didn't know how I'd handle it if he wasn't. Joanne quickly interjected, seeking reassurance of her place in my heart. She promised to remain faithful to Jack if I would speak to him on her behalf. Reluctantly, I agreed to talk to Jack and ask the kids to leave so I could have a private conversation with their mother. After they left, I reflected aloud on how great our children were, adding that I hoped Joanne would honor her promise to remain faithful. I expressed my unconditional love for them, even as doubts about their parentage lingered. Linda protested my harsh language, arguing that her infidelity was limited and didn't define her. She insisted she wasn't what I accused her of being, and she pleaded for civility in our conversation. I conceded to temper my words, but made it clear how deeply her betrayal had wounded me. She confessed that Joanne and Jason had discovered her affair 2 years ago when they visited her at a convention and found a man in her room. She had begged them to keep it a secret, promising it would never happen again. When I pressed her for details about the man she had been involved with, Linda shared how their relationship began. At just 22 years old, she had flirted with him during a convention, and things escalated until they had closeness on the last night. She returned home, and the passion she felt for me that night led to the conception of Joanne. Linda skipped the following year's convention because Joanne was a baby, but the year after, she spent the entire event with him again. Shortly afterwards, she became pregnant with Jason. She admitted she couldn't be certain of his paternity, but insisted I had no reason to doubt they were my children. She assured me she hadn't attended conventions in years when the kids were young, but once they were older, she resumed her annual encounters. When I asked her why she continued the affair, she confessed it wasn't the man himself, but the thrill of doing something forbidden and unexpected. She claimed the anticipation and secrecy were intoxicating, particularly because she believed no one, myself included, would ever suspect her. Even after Joanne and Jason caught her, she reveled in the risk of being exposed. Linda's words were both a confession and a plea, but they only deepened my sense of betrayal. Everything she said made me question the foundation of our relationship, and I couldn't imagine a path back to the trust and love we once shared. I stared at this woman, who I thought I knew better than anyone. She had just told me that not only was I not the only one in her life, but that she spent a significant part of the year thinking about this other man. With me out of the equation, she seemed to think it might make things even more thrilling. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice sharp. "You've been in bed with him how many times? 75, over the past couple decades. And you expect me to just forget all of that? Come on, grab your coat, I'll take you home." "Is this it for us?" Linda asked quietly, almost timidly. "You're a good man, David," she said softly, regret in her voice. "I'm sorry I couldn't meet your expectations. You wouldn't understand what it's like unless you've been through the same thing. I'm sorry you never got to experience it. It makes you feel so much more alive." It was clear Linda was destroying whatever feelings I still had for her. Every time she spoke, I just felt disgust. She didn't seem to care. Maybe she thought I was just some fool. I could think of harsher words. Cheater, liar. I told Jack about Joanne's situation. I couldn't give him advice because once trust was broken with your spouse, it might never come back. I told him everything I knew about his mother-in-law. If she had confessed right after the first time she slept with that man, maybe I would have tried to rebuild what we had. But after 27 years of betrayal, there was no way I could ever consider it. That night we drank heavily, and I had to half-carry Jack home. He crashed on the floor while I took the couch. I figured Joanne must have called her mother because Linda was there for breakfast, furious with me. She was shouting, blaming me for not helping with the situation between Jack and Joanne. I didn't even reply. I just walked out. Weeks passed. Jack did let Joanne back into his life, and I was glad to see them happy again. A few months later, Joanne told me she was pregnant. Both she and Jason seemed to keep a close eye on me, uncertain about who their real father was, me or the man their mother had been seeing. It made me feel good that they leaned toward me, and we grew closer. Jason met a wonderful girl, and they made a sweet couple. I was happy to think of her as my future daughter-in-law. I don't see Linda much anymore, but when I do, I make sure to stay polite. Jason told me she didn't go to the teachers' conference this year. I didn't care either way. When Linda and I split our assets, we did it fairly enough. The house we had shared was sold. I almost considered buying it, but then I realized how hard it would be to live there. Constantly reminded that while I was with her, her mind was often somewhere else, on him. Joanne and Linda still talked often. Joanne later told me that Linda's lover was married too, with a family just like she had. They'd made a pact to never contact each other during the year, only meeting up for the convention. The divorce still haunted me at times, especially when I passed by the 3 restaurants Linda and I used to visit together. The first time I saw her at one of those places, having dinner with another man, the sting of her betrayal hit me all over again. I kept my emotions in check and introduced myself to her date without bitterness. It was awkward, and I was relieved when dinner ended. But that moment, seeing her with him, made me hate her more than I ever did during the divorce process. The tables turned when I invited a colleague of hers to dinner, and we ended up seated right next to Linda, who was dining with a female friend. She couldn't handle the situation as well as I did. She barely touched her meal, excusing herself to the bathroom and never returned to her table. Oddly, I didn't find any satisfaction in seeing her discomfort. After the divorce, Linda and I avoided running into each other at restaurants, though we occasionally crossed paths at family events. Over time, we managed to stay civil, but the bitterness of her infidelity never fully faded. My life took an unexpected turn one day in a grocery store. While waiting in line, I noticed a young boy slip a prepaid phone card into his pocket while paying for his candy. I stepped up and called him out, offering to pay for the card myself so he wouldn't get caught. His face turned red, and he agreed to wait while I handled the transaction. Outside, I handed him the card and asked why he'd tried to steal it. He explained that his mom was in the hospital with a broken leg, and he wanted to call her but couldn't afford it. The boy, Brian, told me his mom was at Mercy Hospital across town, and that he and his younger sister, Wendy, were worried about her. He mentioned their father had been liquidated in Iraq and that they were struggling financially. He feared they'd lose their apartment if the government's financial aid didn't come through soon. I offered to drive him and Wendy to see their mom, but he hesitated, unsure if he could trust me. To ease his doubts, I gave him my wallet and phone, telling him he could call his mother to confirm who I was. After a moment, he agreed, and we arranged to pick up his sister from their home on Aspen Grove Road. He warned me their neighborhood wasn't safe and that his mom was worried about paying the rent after her injury. Brian and I found Wendy exactly where he said she'd be, standing behind a locked door. He explained that I was going to take them to see their mom. Wendy, a quiet, shy girl just starting to grow into adolescence, reminded me of how young my own kids, Jason and Joanne, had been at that age. I wondered how they would have handled such a tough situation. Probably not as well as these two were managing, I thought. The ride to the hospital was mostly silent. I asked Brian who owned the apartment they lived in, but he didn't know. He mentioned it was managed by a company, but that was about it. When we arrived at the hospital, I stayed in the hallway while Brian went to explain our arrival to his mother. A few minutes later, he returned and led me into the room where Kathy Raymond was lying in bed. Kathy, who looked much younger than her age, greeted me with a mix of gratitude and worry. She had striking black hair, which Wendy was gently brushing as they spoke. Kathy thanked me, clearly overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for her children while being stuck in a hospital bed. She expressed how scared Wendy was and how difficult it was to live in their current situation. I introduced myself, and after learning more about their struggles, I made a quick decision. I had a small cabin that I thought could work as a temporary place for them. It wasn't much, just a hunting camp converted into a small home, with basic amenities but no real bedrooms. It had 2 sets of bunk beds and a single bed sleeping up to 8 people. It was a bit rustic, but nice enough, and it was located in a safer neighborhood. I offered them the place to stay while Kathy recovered. I briefly told Kathy about my family, my daughter Joanne, who was 24 and pregnant, and my son Jason, 22, who was engaged. I also mentioned my ex-wife, with whom I got along well enough, and who often visited the cabin with the rest of the family. Kathy seemed interested, but turned the conversation to school. She asked how the kids could be switched to a new school, and I assured her it wouldn't be difficult. I knew the administrators well and could handle the paperwork quickly. She was concerned about the cost, though, and I reassured her that I could help without any issue. I explained that I was a financial advisor at a local bank, lived alone in a small apartment, and didn't have many expenses. I offered to keep track of any costs and said we could discuss repayment when she was able. Kathy then hesitated, asking if there was anything in my past she should be worried about, especially since Brian and Wendy were so young. I assured her there was nothing to worry about, raising my eyebrow at her suspicion. I offered her contact details for my family, including my ex-wife, so she could verify anything she wanted. She thanked me for my honesty, but still seemed doubtful. I told her that, honestly, I didn't know exactly why I was helping, but that I felt it was the right thing to do. I'd raised 2 kids of my own and understood the challenges of being a parent. I wanted to help her children find a better path in life, especially since they seemed to be at a crossroads. Kathy seemed to appreciate the offer, but she remained cautious, expressing that people like me didn't often step up to help others anymore. I nodded and told her I would leave her to think it over and that Brian and Wendy could let me know their decision. About an hour later, Brian and Wendy returned. As visiting hours were closing, Brian said his mom wanted to speak to me one more time. I went back into Kathy's room, and she told me she was putting her trust in me. She thanked me for saving Brian from potential trouble and promised she would be grateful if I followed through on my offer. I smiled and reassured her that I would. I planned to take the kids to the cabin that night so they could see where they'd be staying, then get them some fast food before heading to my apartment. I explained that Wendy would have a room and Brian would sleep on the couch. I also promised Wendy could call her mom before bed if she wanted, and I'd leave her my cell phone to use in case they needed anything. Kathy seemed relieved and nodded, thanking me again. She said she felt she could trust me, and I assured her I wouldn't let her down. As I left the room, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing I had done something right for once. The next morning, I overheard Wendy talking to her mom on the phone again. When she came out of her room, I looked at both her and Brian. "You two need some new clothes for school," I said. "We'll swing by Target, get you both some outfits, then I'll take you to school. I'll pick you up this afternoon, and we'll grab your things from Aspen Grove Road." Wendy picked out a simple blue skirt and a white blouse, just what I had hoped for, and Brian went with new jeans and a t-shirt. By 10 a.m., they were enrolled and in their new classes. I called up Alex, my divorce attorney. "Alex, can you find out who owns the building at 149 Aspen Grove Road?" I asked. "I've got a situation here with the Raymonds. When you find out who owns it, tell them I'll sue if they don't cover the hospital bills. Kathy Raymond has a good case. If they don't respond, tell them I'll have the city send in health and fire inspectors to condemn the place. That should get their attention." "Man, David," Jack said on the other end of the line, "are you turning into some kind of bleeding heart liberal now trying to save all the poor people in town?" "No," I said. "Just one widow with 2 teenagers. I might have more for you to do for them. It's ridiculous that she has to wait for her husband's death benefits. But that can wait for now." "Got it. I'll see what I can do," Jack replied. Soon after, Brian and Wendy came out of school, looking for my car. I handed Brian my cell phone to carry, and we drove over to Aspen Grove Road to gather their things. The kids were excited about having a safe place to live again. They were also relieved to think that their mom wouldn't have to worry about them so much. I promised we'd visit Kathy again that evening. I parked my Impala in front of the rundown apartment building. For a moment, I regretted not bringing Jason with me. I never came down to this part of the city. It was fine in the daytime, but I wouldn't be caught dead here after dark. We started packing Brian and Wendy's things into garbage bags as we didn't have enough boxes. We managed to get most of it, just a few clothes left. The kids began loading up the car, but then I heard a commotion. Wendy screamed. I looked over and saw her struggling with a larger guy, and I noticed a baseball bat leaning against the doorframe. I grabbed it and ran out the door. Brian was on the ground, being beaten by another guy, while 2 others were trying to force Wendy into a rundown car. I ran at the nearest guy with the bat and connected hard enough to hear his ribs crack. Another guy took a blow to the head and dropped instantly. One of the attackers, who had been punching me from behind, was trying to drag Wendy away. I managed to land another blow before stumbling. It was enough to make him let go of her. He turned and bolted for the car, but I swung the bat one last time, hitting his knee with a sickening thud. He screamed and collapsed. The guy who had been on my back figured he'd had enough and scrambled to the car. As I got back to my feet, he took a parting shot. I saw him pull a tool from the car seat as he drove off, firing a shot out the window. I didn't react right away, but then the pain hit. The bullet struck me in the side. Wendy was already screaming for help, her voice panicked. Within minutes, a police car pulled up and she was crying over me. At this point, she was barely dressed, only in a bra and underwear, and covered in more blood than I was. I must have passed out because when I came to, a medic was working on me, reassuring me that the wound wasn't life-threatening. The first thing I asked was for the police to call Jason or my son-in-law, Jack. If they couldn't reach them, I asked them to contact Jack at the factory to take care of the kids in my car. A neighbor had volunteered to watch over Brian and Wendy until one of my sons showed up, and a cop promised to stay too. They rushed me to the same hospital where Kathy was, and I was in the ER for what felt like hours before surgery. When I woke up, I was in the ICU. Joanne was standing by the bed, looking worried. "You're crazy, Dad," she said. "I couldn't believe it when Jack called me about what happened. What were you thinking? Is Wendy and Brian okay? Are you taking care of them, Dad?" I nodded, still groggy. "Yeah, they're fine. Both of them are outside. They can come in soon." Joanne sighed in relief. "Wendy's such a sweet girl. Where did you find her?" "Oh, I get around," I said, trying to keep things light. "She reminds me of you at her age. She's in trouble, so I had to step in. You're all grown up now, about to have a baby, so I guess I needed to start over." "Dad," Joanne trailed off, then paused. Look, after they see you for a bit, will you be okay if I take them to see their mom? I promised I'd do it, but after all this, I can't. I tried to laugh, but it came out more like a groan. Yeah, sure, I'm not going anywhere. Just take them to Kathy for me. Wendy walked in, her eyes filled with tears, and slowly approached me. She kissed my cheek gently and spoke with a shaky voice. Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry you got hurt, but you saved me from those guys. They've been after me for so long. That's why I was so scared to stay there. She paused and then added, I talked to a reporter and told him everything, how you saved me and Brian. He said it's going to be in tomorrow's paper. Was that okay? Of course it's fine, I reassured her. Is my family taking care of you? Wendy nodded. Joanne is going to take you to visit your mom, and I'll stay with her tonight. Brian is staying with Jason. They're both really nice, just like you. Just then, Jason walked in. Dad, are you out of your mind? He said, clearly frustrated. You can't just go into that part of the city alone. You've lived here long enough to know better. And what's the deal with the kids? All they keep saying is that you saved them. Well, I did, I replied. I think their whole family needs help right now. We can manage that. Jason raised an eyebrow. How bad is the fire shot? The doctor hasn't told me much yet, I answered. But it's not as bad as it could be, considering. Jason seemed to relax a bit. By the way, you don't have to worry about the guy who shot you. He died in a car crash while the cops were chasing him. You'll read about it tomorrow. The other 3 guys, they've got broken bones all over. When did you become so violent? Jason half laughed. I've never seen you act like that. Even when you were angry, you didn't go off like you did today. We all thought you couldn't do that. I just thought of Joanne when I saw Wendy struggling, I said, the weight of the moment settling in. I had to do what needed to be done. Jason paused, then added, Yeah, I get it. But Mom's going to be shocked. She never thought you'd divorce her. She always thought she could talk you into staying, no matter what. Honestly, I think she has more respect for you now than when you were married. Great, I muttered with a weak chuckle. Jason continued, By the way, Brian just came in and shook my hand. Brian appeared soon after, looking nervous. Mr. Collins, he said, voice trembling. I called 911 before I was knocked down. Was that the right thing to do? You both did everything right, I said. You fought as hard as you could, and it worked. Your mom is going to be proud of you. As I was speaking, the medical staff came in to move me to a different room. They got me settled for the night, though I still wasn't sure how serious my injury was. I kept asking for painkillers, and then they brought me a breakfast that I could barely eat. They did, however, give me some coffee. The doctor came in later to explain my injuries. You've lost part of a rib, he said. It was shattered, so we had to remove a section. No major internal damage, just some bruising. You can switch to solid food by this evening. The police arrived shortly afterward to take my statement. They assured me that I wouldn't face any charges, even though I'd broken several bones with the baseball bat. A reporter showed up not long after, asking if I'd speak with him. I agreed, though I didn't have much to say. He handed me a newspaper. On the front page, the headline read, Local man saves teenager from abduction or worse. The article was long, mostly quoting Wendy's version of events. She made me sound like a hero, more like a saint than an ordinary guy. The article also included quotes from neighbors about how tough life was in that neighborhood, along with crime statistics. The photographer had done his part too. There was a full-page photo spread in the centerfold. One shot showed Wendy hugging me while I was unconscious, with blood smeared on her clothes. There was another of her crying as I was loaded into the ambulance. One photo showed Brian being treated for a bruise. The last 3 pictures were of the 3 attackers I'd knocked down, and the final photo was of the car crash of the man who had shot me. The reporter looked at me and asked, Anything you want to add to the article? I thought for a moment before responding. I didn't realize how tough it was to live in that part of town until just a couple of days ago. I avoided it because I heard it was bad, but now I see it for myself. There are a lot of good people stuck in situations like the Raymonds. I saw an opportunity to help, but what about everyone else? It's sad that the city lets this kind of thing continue. These kids want to work and earn a living, but they're too scared to even leave their house. The reporter nodded, so I continued. As for me, I just saw a chance to help someone, and I was able to. Maybe someone else will see an opportunity to help too. If they do, they should take it. It's a great feeling. The photographer snapped a picture, and the reporter said, Congratulations. I hope your recovery is quick and painless. I couldn't help but think, yeah, right. Just then there was a soft knock on the door, and it opened to reveal Kathy in a wheelchair, her leg in a cast. She smiled when she saw me sitting up and awake. "Hi, Mr. Collins. When you set out to protect me and my kids, you really go all in, don't you? If I could reach you, I'd kiss you." "Consider it done," I said, smiling. "I read the paper," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "You're a giant in my eyes now. Thank you so much." I shook my head. "But you have to remember, everything you read came from a 14-year-old girl with a lot of emotion." Kathy smiled. "The result's the same, right? The paper didn't write the story. The actions did. I'm grateful." "I understand your doubts at first," I said. "It's natural for any parent to worry about their kids. I feel the same way about mine." A soft knock on the door interrupted us, and Linda walked in looking concerned. "Hi, David. How are you?" She came over and kissed me on the lips. "Damn it," I groaned. "What were you thinking? If you're going to save humanity, can't you do it somewhere without getting shot?" I tried to laugh, but it was too painful. "Linda, meet Kathy Raymond. Her kids were with me when I got shot. You'll have to meet them. They're just as nice as Jason and Joanne. I think Joanne had Wendy with her last night, and Brian stayed with Jason. Kathy, this is my wife, well, ex-wife, Linda Collins." I watched as Linda and Kathy sized each other up, both taking in the other's presence. Linda, tall and composed, looked every bit the professional. I hadn't seen much of Kathy yet, but what I had seen, I liked. For a moment, I felt like I could almost read Linda's thoughts. Linda came by to check on me, though she had to leave soon to get back to her class. After 30 years of marriage, her kiss felt like one from our past, more familiar than anything else. Kathy, sensing the moment, stepped aside to give us some space. As they left, Kathy commented to Linda about our daughter, Joanne, and how Wendy might turn out to be just as kind. I listened as they left, Kathy speaking about Wendy's future with the same care she had for her own children. When Joanne arrived with the kids later, Kathy wheeled herself in behind them. Wendy came over to me, asking if it was okay to call me David instead of Mr. Collins. I smiled, and after a brief exchange, agreed that they could all call me David, as long as they were comfortable. I asked about their day at school, and Wendy shyly admitted that everyone knew about the incident. The teachers even spoke to her, and some girls joked about wishing something like that happened to them, just to make the paper. It made Wendy blush, and she mentioned a boy who had made an inappropriate comment, which Brian quickly threatened to take care of. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I knew how painful that kind of scrutiny could be, but Wendy was right. It would blow over soon enough, and those who understood the gravity of the situation would stand out as true friends. Brian spoke about his own experience at school, where the kids had questioned his connection to me. He explained that I wasn't a relative, just someone looking out for them. They all thought he and Wendy were heroes, but Brian didn't see himself that way. He knew the situation wasn't as simple as the paper made it sound, especially with a life lost in the process. The conversation turned to practical matters. Joanne told me Jack had taken care of everything I'd asked, and Kathy's new home was ready. All her belongings had been moved to the cabin, and Jason would take the kids shopping for food. The cabin would be their home for now, and weekends would bring the usual chaos of the Collins family. I even joked about coming out to the cabin myself for a bit of recovery. It seemed like the best place to rest and regroup. Kathy asked about Linda's visits, and I explained that, though she came by occasionally, we didn't spend much time together anymore. The divorce had been a mutual decision, one born out of unresolved issues. Despite everything, there was still some affection left from our years together, but neither of us had moved on yet. That would come in time, but for now, we were both focused on our respective lives. Alex, my lawyer, came in that afternoon with some good news. The management of the Tamarack tenement, where Kathy had been living, had agreed to cover her hospital bills, though she'd have to sign an agreement not to sue and would be responsible for her own rehab. I was glad to hear that the situation was being resolved. Kathy's things had already been moved, and she'd be staying at the cabin with the kids once she was discharged. Alex seemed curious about how Kathy had managed to move, knowing she had no money. I assured him that I hadn't lent her anything, but had arranged for the kids to stay at the cabin. I also teased him about his interest in Kathy, but he insisted that his intentions were purely about helping the kids. A few days later, I was discharged and returned to my apartment. Though Kathy was grateful for everything I'd done, her constant thanks made me uncomfortable. After a while, I asked her to stop, though she insisted it was how she truly felt. Joan updated me that Kathy's hard cast had been replaced with an air cast, and she was getting around a bit, though still using a wheelchair most of the time. The kids stayed with me until Kathy was ready to move to the cabin. Brian and Wendy were bright and focused. Brian wanted to be a chef, and Wendy was determined to work with children. Wendy had even borrowed a book on babysitting from the library and spent the evening studying it, acing the quiz at the end. Brian followed suit, picking up cookbooks, including one in German. He explained that he'd lived in Germany for a while, so he could read German cookbooks. He was thinking ahead, understanding that versatility was important for a chef. When Kathy was finally ready to leave the hospital, the kids asked me to visit the cabin with them. I went for a short visit, feeling much better as most of the pain had subsided. Kathy, shorter and curvier than Linda, had a warm, easygoing personality. She made everyone feel included, and when we watched TV together, she casually leaned on me for comfort. There was nothing romantic about it. She just liked to be at ease. I spent a week at the cabin before returning to my apartment to get back to work. I needed some space from Kathy. As Alex had predicted, I was starting to fall for her. One evening, she fell asleep on the couch while we were watching TV and leaned into me. Without thinking, I put my arm around her. When she woke up, she apologized, but I reassured her that I was happy to have her close. I learned that Kathy was 8 years younger than me and had a positive, sunny outlook on life. She saw the bright side in everything, and I'd helped her through a tough time. Now she was back to her usual self, and the kids were following her example, putting the past behind them. The cabin became a sanctuary, where I could enjoy the simplicity of life and relive memories of when my own kids were that age. Kathy's joy was contagious, and it made me happier than I'd felt in a long time. There were moments of discomfort. Kathy occasionally asked me to massage her lower legs, and though she made sure to keep herself covered, I sometimes caught glimpses of her upper thighs. It left me feeling conflicted, like a man out of place or a confused teenager. Depending on my mood, I'd retreat to my apartment for some space, but I couldn't stay away for long. The cabin, and especially the kids, always drew me back. Wendy would greet me with a kiss on the cheek, and Brian would give me a hug. He was a hard-working kid, doing yard work for neighbors and quickly building a client base. Whenever he made something he thought I'd enjoy, he'd call out, "Supper's ready." I looked forward to those meals. Wendy was the same. The neighbors quickly realized how seriously she took her babysitting, and soon she had a schedule to keep track of it all. I kept tabs on their schoolwork, but honestly, I didn't need to. They were both consistently in the top 10% of their class. Everyone knew I spent most of my time at the cabin. One afternoon, while I was at my office, Linda called. "David, are you going to be home tonight?" she asked. "Yeah, I'll be here." "Why?" I replied. "I thought I might come by and talk, about the past. We haven't really spent time together lately," she said. "Sure, come over." "Want to stay for dinner? We haven't had one together in a while. I'll throw something in the broiler." "Bring a bottle of wine and whatever you want for yourself," I suggested. At 6:30, Linda showed up. We greeted each other with a warm kiss, like we used to before everything changed. We cooked and ate dinner together. Linda brought a bottle of wine for me, a soft drink for herself, and a cheesecake for dessert. I kept it light, with just one glass of wine. Over coffee, I asked, "What's going on, Linda? You're acting like you're trying to seduce me." "Actually, I am," she said candidly. "I want to see if I made a mistake 27 years ago. If we can still have that spark, I'll know I made a mistake in cheating on you. I know I'm using you tonight, but you called me a hoe, so tonight, I want to be your hoe. I'll know for sure if I made the right choice by the end of the night." Despite her straightforwardness, the thought of all the years she'd been unfaithful made it hard to even consider going along with it. What was happening didn't feel right, and I wasn't enjoying myself. Eventually, I gave up. After a shower, we lay down to talk. We reminisced about Jason and Joanne. Linda started to laugh, almost nervously. "We used to make love thinking about someone else," she said. "Now don't tell me you weren't thinking about Kathy." I didn't respond, but I knew she had it wrong. I wasn't thinking about Kathy. I was thinking about her, Linda, with her lover. Then Linda made it worse. "I was thinking about Gary," she confessed. "Gary?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, Gary Brown. The man I slept with once a year for over 20 years. He called me the other day, the first time he's ever missed me at the convention. When I told him I wasn't going, he asked if I was okay. His wife passed away from cancer a few months ago. He asked if I'd meet him. I said I'd call him back. She looked at me, unsure. "Do you hate me?" "I should," I said. "You hurt me deeply, Linda. I trusted you, and you threw that trust away." "This is the first time I feel like you're being honest with me," I added. "But there's no love left for me to hate you." I thought about her question. whether I still felt the same way about our relationship. Were you as excited as you used to be, waiting for him at the convention? Yes, she replied. Exactly the same. Can I tell you about him? She asked, almost curiously. Maybe it'll help you understand me better and why I did what I did. I've been hesitant, but I'm still curious. Go ahead, I said, bracing myself. Linda paused for a moment, then continued. You're tall, handsome, and always well put together. I've always been proud to be with you, and you've maintained yourself well over the years, but you're also a little too stiff, always in control, never really letting go. Gary is different. He's not as tall as you, but he's warm and affectionate. He has this deep, booming laugh that first drew me to him. I heard it across the convention hall and made my way over, waiting for it again to see who it was. When I finally reached him, we ended up sitting together for dinner. We were both attracted to each other, and that was the beginning. She stopped for a moment, looking down. There's no question that Jason and Joanne are your children. I met Gary's family about 10 years ago when they came to the convention for his oldest son's birthday. Gary has 3 kids, and they all look like him. It's funny, though, there's this girl in the family. She's really plain. It's sad, but she doesn't seem to notice. Or if she does, she chooses to ignore it, which makes her sweet in a way. His wife was a bit sharp, constantly telling everyone what to do. She would tell the kids, even in their 20s, to sit up straight and look smart. At dinner one night, she actually told Gary to quiet down because his laugh was drawing too much attention. It must have been tough living with her. I listened quietly, absorbing every word. It was strange to hear Linda talk so openly now, but it felt like the truth had finally come to the surface. Linda hesitated, her gaze dropping briefly before she spoke. When Gary and I started spending time together, it just felt natural to let loose and enjoy each other's company. We left our responsibilities behind for a little while and simply had fun. Can you blame me for thinking about him over the years? Each time the convention ended, we went back to our normal lives without any disruptions. I've never betrayed you or tried to make a choice between you and him. I'm with you, and I truly believe I've been a good wife. You've called me a hoe, but I don't see myself that way, and I've never, not even for a second, wanted to hurt you. She paused, then continued, her voice softer. I've noticed how you look at Kathy when you think no one's watching. I think you love her, and it's obvious she loves you. Maybe you should take a step in her direction and see where it leads. Find that spark of excitement I feel when I hear Gary's laugh from across the room? It's an indescribable feeling until it happens to you. Don't be so sure about that, Linda, I replied. I've felt that thrill before, like the night I grabbed the bat and rushed out to protect Wendy. I didn't care what happened to me. I just acted, completely caught up in the moment. I imagine it's similar to the risk you took when you were with Gary, knowing it could all fall apart if anyone found out. I feel that same exhilaration when I think about Kathy. Maybe it's time we both embrace it and see what comes of it. Do we need to tell anyone about tonight? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Even Joanne or Jason? No, I said. There's no reason to make them overthink something that's already settled. Linda smiled faintly. I think we can still be friends, David. You're a wonderful person, and I don't regret the years we spent together. I hope, in time, you'll feel the same about me. I never wanted to hurt you, and I'm sorry if I did. We shared a good life for many years, but it's not what either of us needs anymore. Am I right? I nodded. Yes, that's exactly right. Within a week, my life shifted unexpectedly. I had asked Alex to investigate why Kathy hadn't received her late husband's death benefit. It turned out to be a clerical error, but thanks to Alex's persistence and connections, the matter was resolved quickly. Kathy received a letter of apology, and her payment was on its way. When I told her the news, Kathy's joy was overwhelming. She kissed me all over my face, and when she paused, I kissed her back, deeply. Where did that come from? She asked, breathless. It's been there since the day I met you, I said softly. When you were lying in bed, worrying about Brian and Wendy, all I wanted was to kiss you and tell you everything would be okay. Then show me again, she whispered. I kissed her, savoring the warmth and softness of her lips. Kathy wrapped her arms around me, pressing herself close, her eyes full of emotion. You're not playing games with me, are you? She asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't handle that. No, I assured her firmly. When I kiss you, it's real. It's just for you. Are you saying you love me? She asked, almost afraid to hope. Yes, I said, I think about you every night. What about Linda? She asked hesitantly. How will she take this? She's still part of your life. Won't she feel hurt or jealous? No, I said. Linda and I found closure a week ago when she came over for dinner. She told me she wanted to seduce me, but as we talked, it became clear we were both moving on. She admitted she was still drawn to her old lover, and I realized my thoughts were only of you. Linda had confessed that her old flame, now a widower, had reached out to her for the first time in decades. She hadn't shared much with him yet, but planned to reconnect. At the same time, she said she could see how deeply I cared for Kathy and believed the feeling was mutual. Kathy smiled. "Do you think Jason and Joanne would accept me as their stepmother? They've noticed how we are together and keep encouraging me to push you toward making things official. Even Brian and Wendy have been wondering why it's taking so long." I chuckled. Then I guess it's time I propose." Kathy laughed playfully. "I was hoping I'd have to seduce you first, but I'll say yes anyway, and seduce you afterward." 2 months later, Kathy and I were married. Before the wedding, though, Linda surprised everyone by disappearing for a week. When she finally called, her excitement was palpable. "David," she began, "tell the kids their mom is now Mrs. Gary Brown. I'm incredibly happy. I'll be home soon to explain everything. Goodbye, David." And just like that, she hung up, leaving me to process her whirlwind announcement. If you're wondering why I wasn't angry at Linda for her honesty about the affair, it's simple. The love between us had long since faded. Harboring bitterness would have only added to the pain. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and leave the past behind. In the weeks following our wedding, life settled into a rhythm that felt, for the first time in years, natural and fulfilling. Kathy and I had transformed the cabin from a temporary refuge into a real home. The kids, Brian and Wendy, had thrown themselves into school and their interests with a vigor I hadn't seen in children for years. Watching them thrive gave me a new sense of purpose, one I hadn't realized I was missing. Linda's whirlwind marriage to Gary took everyone by surprise, but in some odd way, it brought a sense of closure. Joanne and Jason were initially skeptical, but they soon realized that their mother seemed genuinely happy, freer than she'd been in years. We all met for lunch a month after her wedding, an awkward yet strangely comforting affair where Linda gushed about her new life and even complimented Kathy, something I never thought I'd see. For once, there was no bitterness between us, just an acknowledgement that we had both moved on. Kathy and I didn't rush into our new life together, but every small step felt right. From repainting the cabin walls to planting a garden, our days were filled with a quiet joy that I hadn't experienced in decades. Evenings often found us on the porch swing, her head resting on my shoulder, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Kathy turned to me, her face lit by the soft glow of the porch light. "David," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. "I've been thinking about going back to school. I want to finish my degree in social work. What do you think?" I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "I think it's a wonderful idea. You'd be amazing at it. Let's figure out how to make it happen." Her eyes glistened with tears as she nodded. "Thank you. I never thought I'd have the chance to dream again." As winter deepened, the cabin became a hub of activity. Brian took over the kitchen, experimenting with recipes that filled the house with the aroma of fresh-baked bread and simmering stews. Wendy set up a makeshift classroom in the living room, tutoring neighborhood kids who struggled with their schoolwork. Kathy, true to her word, began researching programs and preparing to apply for college. Joanne's baby arrived in the spring, a beautiful girl named Grace. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a wave of love so profound it nearly overwhelmed me. Jason, too, found his footing, marrying his fiancée in a small, heartfelt ceremony that summer. Life, with all its complexities and scars, seemed to have found a way to heal itself. Kathy and I celebrated our first anniversary quietly, with a dinner cooked by Brian and a heartfelt speech from Wendy. As the kids laughed and reminisced, I looked at Kathy, her smile radiating warmth and love. "I never thought I'd find this again," I whispered to her. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. Neither did I. But I think we were meant to save each other. And so, we built a life together, not perfect, but real, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The past still lingered, as it always does, but it no longer defined us. We were free to move forward, to create a future shaped by choice and hope, rather than regret. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive.